With week 11 in the books, for a large majority of you only have about 2 to 3 more weeks of the fantasy regular season before the playoffs start, and your dynasty trade deadlines are maybe this week or maybe next week before Thanksgiving. So let's take a look at a handful of players to buy right now before your deadlines to win your dynasty leagues, ranging from half-season rentals to a 2024 league winner with continued dynasty value for years. So let's start first with the duo of Buccaneers running backs in Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, who are both currently top 30 in total PPR points on the year, and I like both of these guys for basically the same 3 reasons. Number one, both have been very productive this year. On any given week, both players are seeing double-digit touches, basically anywhere from 12 to 16 touches per game, and they're both involved on the ground and through the air. In fact, Rachaad White is averaging 9 carries and 4 receptions per game for around 65 yards and a touchdown every other week. Bucky Irving is averaging 9.5 carries and 2.5 receptions per game for around 70 yards and a touchdown every other week. So both are nearly identical in usage, and what White lacks in per touch efficiency, he makes up for in overall volume, including slightly more receiving work and vice versa with Bucky Irving. So both of these guys are really solid RB2s or even better flex plays because of the volume in a high-powered offense. Reason number 2, their rest of season schedule is number 1, literally the best schedule for all running backs for the remainder of the year, and they also have the second best 3-week playoff schedule from weeks 15 through 17 and the best 2-week playoff schedule for weeks 16 and 17, including the Carolina Panthers in championship week, who is right now the only team allowing over 30 PPR fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. You get that matchup in championship week. And the third reason to buy either is the upside if one of them were to get hurt and the other gets more weekly volume against that super soft schedule. Sure, Sean Tucker would get involved as the RB2 like we saw early in the year, but in the one game that White missed, Irving put up 18.5 PPR points with over 100 total yards and a touchdown, and I would bet that if Bucky Irving were to miss any games, Rachaad White would also have similar upside. So both of these guys are targets to me. It just comes down to their price to actually acquire them in dynasty leagues. Obviously, because it's Dynasty, Bucky is the new hotness as the rookie running back, so he's going to be more expensive, and I would not pay a first-round pick for him, but an early second or a second plus some upside throw in are prices that I'm willing to buy Bucky Irving for right now. Rachaad White, on the other hand, is going to be a lot cheaper because he's 3 years older, he's inefficient, and we don't really know what his future looks like past 2025 when he becomes a free agent in 2026 at 27 years old. But if you can buy for a late second, your contenders late 25 second or random 26 second, I think that's worth it for a half a season rental this year, and anything else that he gives you after 2024 is just icing on the cake. Now, the other running back that I'm looking to buy right now is James Conner, who is coming off of a bye week this week. Did also have a bit of an injury scare the week before, but came back after halftime and handedly carved up the Bears defense for over 120 total yards on 21 touches. And that's really been the story of Conner's 2024 season. Right now, he's averaging around 90 yards per game and a touchdown every other week on 18 total touches, which has been more than fine for a top 15 fantasy running back right now. But he really hasn't had a massive breakout week. He hasn't broken over 20 PPR points yet this season, and he's had a couple dud weeks of under 7 points as well. But really, he's just been very steady. He's very consistent, and that in and of itself is a valuable thing. But just take a look at Conner's schedule for the remainder of the year. Now, off of their bye week, they get Seattle, Minnesota, Seattle again, New England, Carolina, then the LA Rams. The only difficult matchup there is Minnesota, but they've given up 3 100-plus total yard games to running backs in Jordan Mason, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Kyron Williams. But Seattle, New England, Carolina, bottom 10 against running backs right now, and the Rams are also below average. It is actually the 5th easiest rest of season adjusted strength of schedule for all running backs according to our data at 4for4.com. And then you pair that with Conner's recent end of season runs that he's had over the last 2 years, and we are starting to form a pattern that Conner isn't just feasting on holiday turkey and ham at the end of every year. That joke is still so corny. I wrote that a couple weeks ago, and it's still so massively corny. In 2022, from weeks 10 through 17, Connor averaged over 100 yards and 1 touchdown per game and was the RB6 in fantasy over that stretch. Last year, from weeks 13 through 18, he averaged 125 yards and 1.5 touchdowns per game and was the RB2 overall in fantasy football. Of course, for Dynasty, this is just a second half season rental, very similar to Rachaad White, except maybe it's a little bit worse because Connor is almost 30 and is a free agent at the end of the year, not next year like Rachaad White, but Connor is also more productive than Rachaad White right now, so a late second should do the trick for the rest of 2024, and if he signs somewhere else next year as like a team RB2, kind of like what Austin Eckler did this year, and is still giving us startable weeks in 2025, then that's just the cherry on top. Moving over to wide receiver, let's start with Broncos wide receiver Courtland Sutton, who is the current wide receiver 15 overall in total PPR points right now, and I bet you didn't know he was playing that well, but he is. Now, Sutton has been on an absolute roller coaster all year long. In 11 games played, he's been under double-digit points 4 times and actually under 5 points in 3 of those games, but he's put up 15 or more points 6 times, including each of the past 4 weeks, and 6 of his last 8 games. In fact, since week 4, Sutton is the PPR overall wide receiver 13 in total points, and that includes a game where he literally scored 0 points, and yet he's still basically been a fantasy wide receiver 1 over the last 8 weeks. The main reason for all this production is on the back of some heavy target totals of over 7 targets per game since week 4, again, including a game with 0 targets. Take that game out, and he's averaging over 8.5 targets per game. He's actually seen 8+ targets in each of his past 4 games. He's gone over 70 yards in all 4 games, including 2 100-yard weeks, and he's found the end zone 3 times in that 7-week stretch since week 4. Bo Nix is playing a lot better. The Broncos offense has been starting to click. There's actually scoring points, and Sutton has been a big beneficiary of that while also being a big reason why the offense has been so better. They've also played a lighter schedule in terms of fantasy points allowed to wide receivers recently. The Chargers, Saints, Panthers, Ravens, Falcons, none of them are bad matchups for wide receivers, and the one terrible matchup they had against the Kansas City Chiefs, Sutton still put up 70 yards and a touchdown for 19 PPR points. So then you look at their next 6 weeks through the end of the year, and there's still really no one that is super terrifying. Vegas is a bad matchup on paper, but I think that's more because teams just run on them so much that they don't really need to throw. Then Cleveland is a great matchup. Then they have a bye week, but then the Colts, Chargers, Bengals, all either good to really good matchups for Courtland Sutton in your fantasy playoffs. I just don't think people have been realizing what Sutton has been doing for the past month or so, and that's making him a very underrated and undervalued buy right now. Again, I'm looking at a late second round pick, random 2026 second for Courtland Sutton. Maybe you have to kick in a little bit more to really seal a deal, or it's also possible that you get Sutton for maybe a couple of thirds instead, like what happened in this league just a few days ago from the DLF Trade Finder. Now, the second wide receiver very similarly valued to Courtland Sutton is Calvin Ridley, another player who has been very exceptional over the last 4 weeks, averaging 17.5 PPR points per game since week 8. And we all know why he's been so productive recently. It's because the Titans traded away DeAndre Hopkins and really opened up the target share for Calvin Ridley. Since Hopkins was traded a few weeks ago, Ridley has averaged 9.5 targets per game, 90 yards per game, and he scored twice over that 4-game stretch, though both were in the same game, but 2 touchdowns nonetheless over those 4 games. He's done it with Will Levis, he's done it with Mason Rudolph, and his worst game was actually this past weekend with 9.8 PPR points from 4 receptions for only 58 yards. That is a fair floor, though, for someone that you can buy to start as a flex option with massive wide receiver 1 weekly upside, as shown by his 2 24-point-plus weeks. And then, of course, the other great reason to buy Ridley, the schedule is fantastic. It is the 3rd easiest schedule for wide receivers of anyone in all of fantasy football, and they're also past their bye week, so you don't have to worry about that like you would with Courtland Sutton. The Texans, Commanders, the Jaguars twice, Bengals, and Colts, those are the defenses that Ridley will face to end the year, and every single one of them are anywhere from below average to very bad against the pass. And for most of them too, these games should be shootouts because their offenses are really good and can score points. So if Tennessee has to throw more to stay in these games, to stay competitive, then that's only a good thing for Calvin Ridley. So I do think that Calvin Ridley is going to be a little bit harder to get than Courtland Sutton because of name value and more explosive weeks, but not really much more expensive. I'm still looking to buy Ridley for a late second or a late second plus something, or maybe instead of picks, you're able to dangle a higher upside or maybe younger player in front of the Ridley manager, just like a sexier name in general, that could get it done. I'm talking guys like Rashid Shaheed, Xavier Legette, Adonai Mitchell, maybe Isaiah Likely and a third or something if the other guy needs a tight end. I would bet that most of those names could still get it done for Calvin Ridley right now, especially if the manager isn't competing. And the last name I want to specifically highlight is the rapidly ascending George Pickens, who is now sitting at wide receiver 13 on Keep Trade Cut, jumping up from the wide receiver 30-ish range just from mid-October. And did I call this breakout? Or did I call this breakout? Because Pickens was a massive buy for me all summer and was in multiple videos telling you to buy, and I'm just going to pat myself on the back for this one. Way to go, Addison. On the season right now, Pickens is on pace for 130 targets, 80 receptions, over 1,200 yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. A breakout third season while playing with multiple quarterbacks. But if we look at his numbers with just Russell Wilson, Pickens would be on a 17-game pace for 140 targets, 95 receptions, 50 yards, and 8 touchdowns. That is 100 more yards and 1 more touchdown than what A.J. Brown had last year as a top 5 fantasy wide receiver. And then, of course, the schedule, man. Pickens has the #1 ranked schedule for wide receivers for the rest of the season. The only issues really are matchups against Philly in Week 15, who have just been shutting down every wide receiver for the past couple weeks now. But if you have a first-round bye, then you don't really need to worry about that. And then they also get Kansas City in championship week, Week 17. They are a very tough defense for opposing wide receivers, but they're not totally unbeatable. London and Mooney both put up 14 plus in the same game. McConkey put up 19. Sutton put up 19. They really haven't faced any elite wide receivers besides Jamar Chase, who only had 7 points against them, but that was Gesicki's first breakout week, and Andre Yoshivas caught 2 goal line touchdowns. So again, the Chiefs aren't really unbeatable at the wide receiver position. This is also Dynasty too, so Pickens is really the only guy on this list that I'm paying up for a great end of season run, plus the rest of his career, because he's only 23, he's in his 3rd year, breaking out as an alpha wide receiver, so he is a buy for more than just half of a season. So if you can still buy Pickens for a 2025 first, or a first and second even, I am doing that in a heartbeat. If you have Jaden Reed, Zay Flowers, Devonta Smith, Rome Odunze, Jackson Smith, and Jigba, what do you have to add to them to get to George Pickens? If it's a second or some other player in that kind of value range, that is a smash with any of those wide receivers. I would even look to trade down from A.J. Brown to see if you can get Pickens in a second, or Pickens and maybe somebody else in this video to fill another lineup spot for your playoff run. That is how I want to buy Pickens now before your trade deadline. And if you're curious on a few more names that I'm just going to quickly rapid fire, some other cheap guys that you could look to buy could be Ramondre Stevenson, Tyrone Tracy, Aaron Jones, maybe even Josh Jacobs or David Montgomery at the running back position. Then you have Jacoby Myers, Quentin Johnston, maybe Wan'Dale Robinson as well at the wide receiver spot. At tight end, the answer is just Trey McBride. Honestly, the Cardinals in general just have a tremendous schedule for fantasy, but if you're looking for a tight end to buy in Dynasty, the answer is Trey McBride. I am also interested in any potential buy low opportunity on Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr. Both these guys are coming off their bye weeks. They have an amazing end of season schedule, so if you can buy either of them at a discount for any lack of production recently, you have maybe 4 to 5 more days to do that. Oh, and congratulations to Saquon Barkley and Kyron Williams managers. Their schedules are phenomenal for the rest of the season, so go win a championship. And if you're interested in some of the players that I'm looking to sell before trade deadlines, then you can check out that video right up here.